Is this camera straight? Let's have a look. Says it is. Go there. There's some LED lights there. I thought they might add some pizzazz, but they've really not done anything. I'll keep them on. Wow, I've been gone for a hot minute. I think it's over a month now. Over a month. I meant to do this weekly, but you know what? I gave up. Hello again. Hello, stranger. I originally had a video to do... Oh, flip me, what am I saying? I had originally planned to do a video on the Napoleonic era, but a history-based YouTube channel that will be infinitely more successful than I will ever be did one of those videos. So that one went in the bin. I've rewritten this entire thing to be a bit more relevant, hopefully. That video will probably never be seen. Goodbye, Napoleonic time. Bye. Anyway, here's something fun from history. The July Monarchy. What a wacky name. Honestly, if you're not French, I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't blame you for having literally minimal clue what that means. Was it an indie pop punk band? Was it a brand of lingerie? Was it a throwaway fling during France's experimental phase? Maybe. It was all of these. And more. Except not the first two. That I know of. And on that third one, if you consider something that lasts 18 years a fling, I would kind of question where you're coming from with that. And what your definition of a fling is. A fart swing. That's so bad. It hasn't even got the letter L in it. The July Monarchy was a period in French history lasting from 1830 to 1848 under the rule of King Louis Philippe. Philippe me. Dumb joke. Under the rule of King Louis Philippe I. And boy howdy, was it a fun time. It was a takeover from the more conservative Bourbon Restoration, which was itself a takeover from the Napoleonic era, which was itself a takeover from the French Revolution, which was itself a takeover of the Ancien Regime. Ancient Regime. I'm going to Google how to pronounce that. Hi, Tom Editing here. Oh, I'm zooming in very slowly. What am I doing? Hi, Tom Editing here. It doesn't get any better. I can't speak French. The pronunciations just get worse from here, so I'm very sorry. I googled it, and I still got it wrong. I'm dumb. Also, yes, I've just got up and my hair is still wet, but I want to do this video and finish it, please. Don't judge. I apologise so much for my pronunciation of French words here. I cannot speak French, and I wish I could. Please, can someone teach me? Hon baguette. France really can't get enough of that old regime swish-up. The power shake-up, the controlling shimmy. Shimmy, shimmy. And comparing it to the Bourbon Restoration, which came immediately after the Napoleonic era, it was meant to be founded on more liberal foundations of liberté, égalité, fraternité. Am I getting better? Am I getting worse? I'll never know. Worse. It may have been proclaiming this period of liberalism, like the French Revolution, but this time, it had an official king. Huzzah! It was pretty popular at the time, trying to find a middle ground between the two extremes that France had just gone through, with the conservative right and the liberal left. I should have clarified it was pretty popular at the start, not necessarily the whole way through. We'll get onto that in a little bit. And this popularity was reflected in the change of title. No more was he King of France. King Louis Philippe I was King of the French. Baguette. I can't just say baguette every time I talk about France, because this video will go on for far too long. Eiffel Tower. That's not even built yet. Now, I am not jealous of France's position at this point, especially thinking of their relationship with their cultural and societal past. How does a country try and maintain normalcy after the tumultuous period that was Napoleon? I'll flip. I kicked the flipping. Camera stand. Camera stand on the floor. It's not in some book still. Because I'm too tall. Wow, am I an artist? Call me Jean-Baptiste Isabey, who is a painter, not a singer. Dumb. You can understand why the Restoration monarchy, which was forced back onto the scene in 1815, would try to be as anti-Napoleon as possible. But how does an institution that was so vilified, so propounded as being an enemy of the people for 20 years prior, hope to maintain any form of control? It's no wonder the middle ground surged forth. But the ghost of Bonapartism, that desire to deliver the fate of the French people into Napoleon's hands, or the hands of his dynasty, never really left. This was highlighted later with the rise of Napoleon III in the 1840s, 1850s, who eventually became Emperor of France.
Good.
I should stop making these jokes. They're not funny. They're not funny. They're basic nationalistic commentary, and that's it. I do love bread, though. But it was even present during the July Monarchy. King Louis Philippe I interned Napoleon's ashes away from St. Helena, where he'd been exiled, back to France. And this caused huge displays of public jubilations, parties, parades, celebrations all around. It really showed there was still that patriotic fervour surrounding Napoleon. Napoleon was dynamite, you could say. And the people were just itching to blow up. Oh my goodness, I've got a new light and it is making me sweaty. I am so sweaty right now, so I'm sorry if I look gross. As I said, the July Monarchy tried to show itself as a happy compromise, a juste milieu between the two extremes of the Bourbon Restoration and the Napoleonic era. Well, Napoleonic era and the French Revolution, because Napoleon still propagated himself as the result of the French Revolution. I don't know, I'm not going to go into the details there of how he saw himself as the child of the revolution. Other video. Other people have talked about it. Maybe I'll talk about it some other time. There was definite continual commemoration of Napoleon's reign throughout the July Monarchy. In 1833, for instance, there was a big column, a big tasty column that I forgot its name, and everyone took a bite. It was a kebab shop. They opened the first kebab shop in 1833. These are not facts. This is lies. There was a definite continual commemoration of Napoleon's reign throughout the July Monarchy, and I'm going to give you some quick flash answers. Not answers. I'm going to give you some quick fire examples of public work events commemorating Napoleon during the July Monarchy. Here we go. In 1833, the Vendôme column, that great symbol of Napoleon's victories at Austerlitz, was restored. In 1836, the decorations around the Arc de Triomphe, which is arguably the most famous monument to Napoleon's successes to this day, were finished. In 1837, when the Palace of Versailles was opened as a museum, there was a whole room dedicated to Napoleonic paintings, which I'm sure you can guess were very pro-Napoleon. I don't even know I'm looking at the camera. Am I looking at the camera, Ma? Ma? The legend of Napoleon was nurtured under official patronage, so much so that critics accused the July Monarchy for succumbing to the romantic admiration of Napoleon. This isn't entirely true, however. Louis Philippe had a very interesting view of history, and he wanted to see a cultural shift away from that idea of history as a battlefield, where you have to pick a side and die on that hill, to one of history as a museum, where you have to peruse through and understand what happened a bit better. He wanted French people to be inspired, to be proud of all France had done throughout all of its history. Because who doesn't love a bit of aggressive cultural pride in the morning? It looks like nationalism. Tastes like it too, but it's a breakfast cereal. I'm only kidding. I know it's not mad nationalistic to look back on what your country's done and say, hey, they've done a few good things. It actually is very clever, a very smart way of tackling that cultural zeitgeist that was hampering his reign. The very conversion of Versailles from a palace to a museum highlights this thought process. A clear monument, a shining beacon to the Ancien Regime, filled to the brim with wonders of empire. Wonders of the revolution. It's understandable why it's easy to see the safekeeping of Napoleonic monuments as a guarding of that Bonapartist legacy, but it's important to see it in context. The spectator wandering around Versailles might stop in the Napoleonic room and admire the paintings, but that was just one room in a long and storied history with many other sections. And connecting the French people to their history really was the emphasis here. All the way through until his overthrow in 1848, King Louis Philippe I had plans and ideas for further memorials of Louis XVIII and Charles X of the Restoration Monarchy. He really felt he couldn't compete with the glories of the past. He even turned down tapestries depicting French victories in Algeria during his reign because he thought it would shatter the uniqueness of the other artworks. Did somebody mention Algeria? Hey, not yet. That'll come later. Louis Philippe spent a whole chunk of his reign trying to consolidate his rule. He'd come from a cadet branch of the overthrown, once vilified House of Bourbon, and he spent most of his life in exile away from France. Although that doesn't really affect monarchs. Take George I of Britain, for instance. Very German, heading up the most British of institutions. Although Britain and Germany do have quite a lot in common. There's a strong drinking heritage in both the countries. If you need a top-up, Algeria. Did somebody mention Algeria?
This guy stinks!
No, and that was just a massive stretch at best. The political situation during the July Monarchy was also very interesting. Since it was a constitutional monarchy, they held regular elections, and this meant multiple parties. And there were several parties that were openly against King Louis Philippe I. As long as his party that supported him was in power, he'd remain in power. But that was an awful lot of stress trying to maintain his rule. Did somebody mention Algeria? Literally no. But I suppose it is time to talk about that fun state of affairs. Wow, Tom, you're so good at segueing between two very different topics of conversation. France invaded Algiers in June 1830. And the astute among you might realise that June comes before July. So the initial invasion plan might not have technically had anything to do with the July Monarchy, but the fall of Algiers occurred in July. Haha, it is relevant! Although admittedly that was a few days before the fall of the Bourbons, so technically still the Restoration Monarchy. Shut your face. But Louis Philippe had to deal with the aftermath of this colonial endeavour. And he just stacked his government with liberal opponents to colonial expansion. What a treat! And although there was some vocal support for leaving Algeria alone, it turned out it was actually more difficult for the French for them to get out of there than for them to just continue pushing on. Oh, how lucky! How lucky for the native populations! Their oppression was only slightly more convenient than the French leaving. Joy of joys! It is important to note, however, that despite several colonial pushes into it, France didn't officially occupy Algeria until the end of 1848. So there's that. But regardless, Louis Philippe needed someone to look out for French interests in the Algeria region. So, he commissioned a man named Duc de Rovigo as head of military staff in Algeria. Ooh, boy howdy, that was a mistake. Rovigo was merciless, violently oppressing anyone who had even the slightest question to French rule in the area. They bombed, murdered civilians, innocent people. They sentenced people to execution by death fights, where they would have to fight other prisoners to the death, otherwise they would be tortured, or their family would be tortured. It's so interesting, isn't it? This was an era of proclaimed liberalism, that attempted middle ground, or they still definitely had some liberal elements, and they still went ahead with doing stuff like this. Whoa, colonialism! And throughout the July Monarchy, all the way up to 1848 when it finally ended, they did continue to push into Algerian territory. This started the ball rolling that would keep going, keep gathering speed all the way up until the 1950s. Louis Philippe even used a colonial expedition into Algeria in 1837 as an attempt to win more votes for him. Didn't work though, lol. In that election of 1837, only 220 of the 450 seats were won by the party that supported him. There was a real risk of a heterogeneous coalition against his rule. His was not the most popular of reigns. We'll leave that to Lady Gaga.
The joke here is that Lady Gaga released a very popular track with Rain On Me featuring Ariana Grande in 2020.
The monarchy never really won the hearts and minds of the people. It was too conservative for those who were politically leaning left. It was too liberal for those who were too politically leaning right. In the end, in trying to please everyone, they pleased no one. Just a bunch of sad French people. Boo-hoo. That's not funny. That's not funny. It's a little funny. And then the Revolution of 1848 erupted alongside revolts across Europe. And that is a whole other topic that is actually really interesting and really defines a lot of what Europe is today. But again, other topic, maybe another video. I'm trying not to do so much Europe though, so maybe at some point. Our good friend Louis Philippe fled to the UK, where he lived for the rest of his life. He did have some supporters left back in France, named Orleanists, I think it's pronounced, not too sure, but never enough for him to come back and assert his reign. Thank you for listening to this one, beautiful people. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned a couple of things. I'm sorry I've only been scratching the surface with this stuff. It's very, very, surface level. But if you want me to go into more detail, please tell me. I'm happy to change up the format if this isn't working. Next time, I think I'm talking about the Ashanti Empire, a pre-colonial African state. It's been suggested by a couple of people, Indigo Fox and Joel on my Insta. So stay tuned for that. That should be quite exciting. I'm very excited to read about that. So hopefully I'll take less time than a literal month and a bit to do another video. Don't know why I zoomed in for that last bit. I am not technologically proficient.
Okay, this is the actual end now. Goodbye. Enjoy this small blooper.
In 1833, the Vendome column, which was a symbol of Napoleon's victories at Auschwitz? No! Austerlitz. Oh my goodness. Can I keep that in? I'll see whilst I'm editing. You'll see here if I've kept it in. I probably will. Goodness gracious me.